The chandelier sparkled above them as elite guests laughed, swirling wine in crystal glasses. Robert leaned forward, grinning at the maid's 12-year-old daughter. "Come on, girl," he smirked. "Play something simple. Maybe happy birthday." Laughter followed. Cameras came out. What they didn't know was the girl they mocked was about to shatter their entire world with just her fingertips. The grand piano stood like a trophy in the corner of Robert Whitmore's Beverly Hills mansion, polished to perfection, untouched by anyone who couldn't afford to breathe near it. The living room buzzed with conversation, clinking glasses and designer perfume. Guests lounged on velvet chairs, their diamonds catching the light from the chandelier above. Carmen stood near the kitchen door in her crisp maid's uniform, holding a tray of tiny hors d'oeuvres. Her daughter, Sophia, quietly followed her, helping as always. At just 12, Sophia had learned how to be invisible in houses like this. Quiet hands, lowered eyes, careful movements. She balanced the tray carefully, trying not to slip on the polished marble. Robert, the host of the evening, noticed her. He was a man who liked to put people in their place, especially people who couldn't afford to be in his. "Hey, Carmen," he called casually, waving a hand as if shooing a fly. "Your daughter plays the piano, right?" Carmen froze for a split second, her fingers tightening around the tray. She practices, sir," she answered softly. Robert grinned and turned to his guests, who looked half bored, half drunk. "Well, let's have a little entertainment. It's not every day we get a live performance from a help." Chuckles echoed around the room. Sophia's eyes widened. She hadn't even touched the Whitmore Steinway. It was the kind of piano you only saw in magazines. Still, she nodded respectfully, waiting to be dismissed. But Robert wasn't done. "Come on, girl. Over here." He gestured to the piano. "We'll keep it simple. Just play Happy Birthday or something. Make it short." There was a ripple of laughter. From a velvet couch, Victoria Whitmore, Robert's 16-year-old daughter, snorted into her mocktail. "Daddy, she probably doesn't even know how to read music. She's like 12 and poor." Her friends giggled, already pulling out their phones. Sophia felt her cheeks burn, but she didn't move. She didn't speak. Carmen stepped forward slightly, her mouth parting as if to say something, but then she stopped. She knew better. She'd been working for people like the Whitmores for too long. She had seen what happened to staff who spoke out of turn. Sophia looked at her mother. Carmen gave her a tiny, almost invisible nod. A mother's nod. The kind that says, "I know it's unfair, but I trust you." Robert leaned back in his leather armchair, sipping his $1,000 wine. "What's the worst that can happen?" he laughed. "If she's terrible, at least we'll get a good laugh. Right?" Victoria rolled her eyes, pointing her phone camera at Sophia. "This is going to be hilarious," she whispered. The room buzzed with cruel anticipation, but Sophia wasn't afraid. She walked toward the piano, slowly, deliberately, like someone walking into a storm they'd been through before. What the Whitmores didn't know was that this was not the first piano Sophia had ever faced. Sophia stood in front of the gleaming Steinway grand piano, her reflection barely visible in its polished black surface. She felt the heat of every eye in the room boring into her, some curious, most amused. She wasn't supposed to be seen. That's how it had always been in homes like this. The help didn't exist unless they were needed. "Let's go, sweetheart," Robert said, his voice syrupy with sarcasm. "Don't be shy now. Give us a little show." A chorus of chuckles followed, bouncing off the marble, floors and glass walls. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone muttered, "This should be good," while another whispered, "Bet she doesn't even know which key is which." Sophia glanced at her mother, who now stood half hidden behind a doorway, clutching an empty tray to her chest like a shield. Carmen's knuckles were white. She knew this wasn't just a performance. It was a trap, but she also knew her daughter. Victoria raised her phone and zoomed in, smirking. "Smile for TikTok," she said loudly. "I'll add a filter so it looks like you're in a real concert hall." The laughter hit harder this time. Sophia walked to the piano bench, quietly pulled out and sat down. Her old sneakers, worn from walking the same 6 blocks every morning, brushed against the marble tile. She adjusted the bench's height instinctively, the way she'd done 1,000 times on the wobbly stool at the church where she practiced. But nobody in the room saw that motion for what it was. They saw a poor kid pretending to be something she wasn't. "Twinkle, twinkle" might be too hard, someone muttered. Another voice added, "Play Chopsticks. That's more your level." Victoria leaned toward her dad. "This is going to be so embarrassing." "For her, obviously," she said, flipping her phone camera. Robert chuckled and raised his wine glass. "To live entertainment," he declared, and the guests clapped mockingly. Sophia's hands hovered above the keys. The room went quiet, not out of respect, but anticipation. That strange kind of silence before a public crash, like watching someone slip on ice. She didn't press a single key. Not yet. Instead, she let the silence stretch, like the pause before thunder. She looked up. For the first time that night, she made eye contact with every single person in the room. Calmly, unflinchingly. Her gaze moved from Robert's smug grin to Victoria's phone, to the smirking guests who treated this moment like a meme waiting to happen. And then she spoke. "May I choose a song?" The question wasn't timid. It was clear, unapologetic. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Of course," he said with mock generosity, gesturing toward the keys. "Play whatever you want. We're all here to enjoy the show." Carmen's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. The room didn't. The room only knew that a maid's daughter was about to play a rich man's piano. They didn't know that the daughter had never once asked to play it, that she had spent her life practicing in places no one would dare step foot in. Not for music, not for art, not for anything. And now here she was, with the weight of every insult floating around the room, and every phone camera waiting to capture her failure. Sophia placed her fingers on the keys. They didn't tremble, not even a little, because this wasn't fear. This was her moment. Theirs was laughter. Hers was discipline. They brought wine and gossip. She brought 8 years of 5 a.m. practice, calloused fingertips, and the silent encouragement of a mother who sacrificed everything. She took one long breath, and then she pressed the first key. The note rang out clear and soft, hanging in the air like a secret just revealed. But long before this moment, long before the mansion, the marble floors, and the cruel laughter, Sophia's music had filled a different space. 6 blocks away, behind a rusted gate and cracked stained glass windows, sat St. Augustine's Church. Every morning at 5 a.m., when the sky was still dark and the streets were silent, Sophia slipped out of bed, laced up her worn sneakers, and walked through the cold. She wasn't meeting friends. She wasn't chasing dreams. She was chasing survival, the only kind her mother believed in, the kind built on discipline, not daydreams. Inside the old church sat a broken piano, its ivory keys chipped, the top lid permanently stuck open. But to Sophia, it was a grand stage, a sacred instrument, a world away from being the maid's daughter. Father Miguel, the priest, always left the door unlocked for her. He never asked questions. He just swept the aisles while she practiced. Sometimes he paused to listen. Once he told her, "Mija, you play like the music is already inside you. You're just letting it out." He was half right. The music didn't start with Sophia. It started with Carmen. Before she was a maid in Beverly Hills, Carmen Morales was the first violinist of the Medellin Philharmonic in Colombia, a rising star, a name people whispered with admiration until the violence came, until the politics turned, until a single wrong affiliation sent her fleeing, with nothing but a child in her arms and a bag of sheet music clutched to her chest. In America, nobody cared who she had been. She scrubbed toilets. She washed dishes. She smiled when insulted. And at night, she whispered music theory into her daughter's ear. They had no piano at home, so Sophia practiced scales on the kitchen table, her fingers moving over imaginary keys while Carmen tapped rhythm with a spoon. Carmen spent her only $15 a month on used sheet music from a street vendor downtown. They were creased, coffee-stained, and out of order, but to them, they were treasure maps. Sophia grew up knowing silence was safer, but her mother taught her that sound, the right sound, could be power. So she practiced every morning in a broken church, while the people now watching her laughed in warm halls and sipped wine from crystal. They had no idea who they were watching, but they were about to find out. Sophia's feet touched the floor like she was walking across a frozen lake. Every step deliberate, careful, silent. The laughter had faded, but the air was thick with something worse. Expectation. Not hope, not belief, but that sharp, bitter anticipation. The kind reserved for people waiting for a failure they think is guaranteed. The marble floor beneath her was cold and too clean, the kind of clean made by invisible hands like her mother's. As she moved, the room felt quieter than it had been all night. Even the ice in the glasses stopped clinking. Victoria's phone camera followed her every move. Zoomed in, framed the shot. Maid's daughter attempts piano. She already had a caption ready. Sophia reached the bench. She didn't sit yet. She placed one hand on the edge of the Steinway, the same piano she had dusted with her sleeve months ago when no one was watching. The same piano she had dreamed of playing, not for them, but for herself. From the kitchen doorway, Carmen watched in stillness, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her lips moved silently, not in prayer but in memory, of her own hands, once poised on a violin, now raw from bleach and steel wool. This moment was one she had imagined 1,000 times. But now that it was real, it terrified her, because she knew that in front of her daughter stood a stage, and behind her, a cliff. Sophia finally sat. She adjusted the bench's height. Instinctively, professionally, it was the smallest movement, but Carmen caught it, and so did someone else. Dr. Patricia Williams had just entered the room. She was early and unnoticed. She stood at the back, behind a row of tall guests, her coat still draped over one arm. But the sight before her made her pause. A child, at a Steinway, in a maid's uniform, and a silence that didn't feel like ceremony. It felt like setup. Robert leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin, wine glass near his lips, confident he was about to be entertained or amused. Sophia placed her fingers on the keys. They rested there, still, light ready. She didn't look up. She didn't blink. She just took one breath, the kind you take before everything changes. And in that pause, so heavy you could hear it, the whole room leaned in. Nobody knew it yet, but the girl they were about to laugh at was about to teach them all what it meant to be silenced. The first note rang out, soft, delicate, impossibly precise. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was right. So right that the room didn't even realize it had gone quiet. Robert blinked, the corner of his smug grin twitching slightly. He had expected hesitation, clumsy fingers, maybe a broken tune. Instead, he heard Chopin, and not just the notes. The feeling. Victoria squinted at her phone screen, expecting to capture a viral embarrassment. But the video wasn't funny. Not yet. She zoomed in again, confused. Sophia's fingers floated across the keys like they belonged there, like they had grown up inside the piano. The rich guests exchanged glances. One of them sipped wine without tasting it. Another shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Nobody said out loud, but they all felt it. Something was off. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't a child stumbling through "Happy Birthday." This was someone who knew what she was doing. Robert leaned forward slightly, as if seeing the girl for the first time. The wine in his hand had gone untouched. His brows furrowed just a little. From the back of the room, Dr. Patricia Williams stopped in her tracks. She tilted her head, listening. Her decades as a critic had trained her ears to pick up everything: tone, timing, emotion. What she heard now made her set her coat down slowly on a chair. Sophia didn't flinch. Her hands glided from octave to octave, effortlessly. Every movement had meaning. Every pause had weight. She wasn't copying Chopin. She was communicating with him. The kind of playing that comes from obsession, not lessons. Victoria's phone slowly lowered. Her smirk disappeared. Her thumb hovered over the stop button. She didn't understand what she was hearing. Not fully, but it made her uncomfortable. This wasn't funny anymore. At the kitchen door, Carmen covered her mouth with her hand. The music, it wasn't just familiar. It was hers. The same piece she had taught Sophia using air keyboards and whispered rhythm. The same music she played on her own violin, in a concert hall far away, in a life that didn't exist anymore. Now, her daughter played it better than she ever had. The piece continued, unfolding like silk, then crashing like waves. And with each passing second, the mood in the room shifted, from laughter to confusion to awe. Robert set his wine glass down. Victoria put her phone on her lap. No one could look away. And Sophia, she never once looked up, because she didn't need to. She had already taken the room. Halfway through the Chopin, just as Sophia transitioned into the second movement with a haunting grace that made the air itself feel thinner, the front door clicked softly. No one noticed, not at first. Dr. Patricia Williams stepped inside, brushing a few raindrops from her coat. She was early. The invitation said dinner at 8, but she always preferred arriving during cocktails. It allowed her to observe without being observed. She had attended hundreds of such parties. Rich people with rich toys and poor taste. Performances for attention. Music for show. But tonight, something was different. She froze. She heard Chopin. Not the kind of Chopin that gets murdered at school recitals. Not the mechanical, soulless renditions money often buys. No, this was alive. She followed the sound. Each step deeper into the Whitmore mansion felt like stepping closer to a secret. At the room's entrance, she stopped, stunned. At the grand Steinway sat a girl, young, barely 12. Her clothes too simple, her back too straight. Fingers fluttering over the keys like a breeze touching water. And the room, dead silent. The guests, mouths slightly open, glasses forgotten in hands. Victoria, motionless. Robert, hunched forward, trying to understand what he was hearing. Patricia leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered, "Who is she?" The woman blinked. The maid's daughter, I think." Patricia's eyes widened. Her critic's instincts kicked in. She scanned the girl's posture, the tension in her shoulders, the phrasing in her rhythm. This wasn't child's play. This was discipline. This was emotion. This was artistry, without a word. Patricia reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and began to record. Not for social media, for evidence, because she knew, without needing to ask, that this moment was rare, possibly historic. 12 years old, poor, invisible, and yet here she was commanding a room full of the most powerful people in the city, without saying a single word. Patricia's hands trembled slightly, not from age, from awe. Her eyes glistened. She'd spent 40 years reviewing concerts in Vienna, New York, Paris, but what she was witnessing now might just be the most powerful performance of her life. And she didn't even know that the girl hadn't started yet. As the final note of Chopin faded into stillness, Sophia lifted her hands from the keys and placed them gently in her lap. The room didn't breathe. No applause, no whispers, just stunned, reverent silence. Robert sat frozen, his wine untouched, his certainty cracked. Victoria clutched her phone without pressing anything. For once, she had nothing to say. Sophia looked up the first time all night. Her eyes scanned the room, steady and calm. But beneath that stillness was something ancient, something earned. She spoke, softly, clearly, like someone who wasn't asking permission anymore. "That was Chopin," she said. A pause. "Now I'll play something I wrote myself." Carmen's hand flew to her chest. Her lips trembled. The room shifted, just slightly, like gravity had changed direction. Sophia placed her fingers back on the keys and began. The first notes came like a whisper, fragile, delicate, almost invisible, the way she and her mother had lived. The melody curled through the room like smoke. It wasn't classical. It wasn't jazz. It was something else, something raw, born from broken sidewalks, whispered lullabies, the thump of mother's heart beating through a child's cheek as she sleeps on her chest. It was pain, years of it, the humiliation of being unseen, the sting of she probably can't read, the ache of waking at dawn to practice alone. But there was beauty too. Grace. Resilience woven through every note like thread through a wound. The music built slowly, not to impress, but to reveal. Dr. Williams blinked hard. She had stopped recording. Not because the moment wasn't worth it, but because some performances aren't for documentation. They're for witnessing. Tears slid silently down her cheek. She'd written about thousands of artists, but none had ever spoken to her through music the way this child just had. Sophia's hands danced, moving faster now, sweeping into a crescendo that sang of hope, stubborn, unkillable hope. The kind that survives minimum wage, language barriers, and knowing you'll never be invited to sit at the table, only serve it. The guests were silent, transfixed, some with wet eyes, others with heads bowed. They had come for entertainment. What they got was truth, and it was breaking them beautifully. As the final note of Sophia's composition trembled into silence, her hands remained on the keys, suspended, like the music hadn't quite let go. No one moved. Then, slowly, she lowered her fingers and sat back, chest rising but face calm. For a full 5 seconds, the room was completely still. Then someone clapped. Once. Then twice. Then the room erupted, not in polite applause, but in something reverent, raw, desperate, like they were trying to make up for every second they hadn't listened before. But before the moment could slip away, a voice cut through it, firm, low, filled with wonder. "Robert, do you even know who she is?" Every head turned. Dr. Patricia Williams had stepped forward, her eyes still wet, her voice shaking with awe and fury. Robert blinked. "She's Carmen's daughter," he said cautiously. "No!" Patricia walked toward the kitchen, locking eyes with the woman still standing in the doorway, hand over her heart. "She's Sophia Morales, and her mother is Carmen Morales, first violinist of the Medellin Philharmonic, recipient of the Latin Award for Musical Excellence, and one of the finest musicians ever come out of Colombia." Gasps filled the room. Victoria's mouth hung open. Carmen stepped forward, slowly, as if surfacing from a dream. "Dr. Williams," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I never expected to see you again." Patricia smiled through tears. "I always wondered what happened to you." Robert stumbled to his feet. "Wait, what? Carmen, you never told me." "You never asked," Carmen replied gently. Dr. Williams turned back to Sophia, her voice now professional, but still trembling. "That piece you play, it's original?" Sophia nodded. "It's called Invisible," she said softly. "I wrote it for people like my mother, people you see every day, but never really look at." Patricia exhaled sharply, fighting tears. "That was one of the most extraordinary compositions I've ever heard from someone your age, or any age." She turned to Robert. "This girl is not just talented. She's a prodigy." Then to Carmen, "I want to offer her a full scholarship to Curtis Institute. Room, board, everything. And I'll personally arrange a meeting with Sony Classical. They need to hear her." Carmen covered her mouth, sobbing. Robert looked like he'd been slapped. Victoria's phone slipped from her lap onto the floor. The room that had once laughed at a maid's daughter now stood in the presence of a legend. And her legacy, the video Victoria had recorded, meant to mock, was already making rounds online by morning. But it didn't go the way she planned. Instead of laughs, it sparked outrage and awe. The clip showed a little girl, humble and quiet, sitting at a grand piano in a room full of wealth and arrogance, and silencing them all with a song that brought professionals to tears. The caption read, "They asked the maid's daughter to play for fun. Then she played this." It went viral within hours. 15 million views in a day. Hashtag Invisible trended worldwide. Comment after comment poured in. This is what real talent looks like. She didn't break the silence. She owned it. Imagine paying $20,000 for piano lessons and still being shown up by a 12-year-old with nothing but heart. News outlets picked it up. Dr. Patricia Williams published a feature in the Los Angeles Times. The Symphony of the Invisible, a damning piece on how society overlooks genius in favor of privilege. Robert Whitmore, once the host of elite fundraisers, became a national embarrassment. His sponsors pulled out. Business partners distanced themselves. He lost 2 major contracts in a single week. And Victoria? Her social media empire crumbled. What began as a joke destroyed her reputation. Meanwhile, Carmen received job offers from orchestras across the country. She accepted a position as assistant conductor at the Los Angeles Youth Symphony. And Sophia? She had meetings with labels, press interviews, and a scholarship waiting for her. For the first time in their lives, they weren't background noise. They were the main stage. 6 months later, the lights dimmed inside Carnegie Hall. Sophia Morales stood center stage, her fingers gliding across the Steinway as a packed audience held its breath. As the final note of Invisible echoed into silence, she rose and bowed. In the back row, barely visible, Robert Whitmore sat alone in a cheap seat, forgotten by the world he once ruled. Sophia met his eyes briefly. "Being invisible was a strategy," she whispered. "You earned yours."